You think you already know what the bad side of Taurus is. I bet someone has already told you this, or you've said it about yourself almost apologetically. Stubborn, materialistic, excessively jealous. A person who doesn't budge even when the ground has cracked beneath them. And we repeat this list like someone reading a packaging label without ever opening the product to see what's really inside. But there's a question no one asks because it's unsettling. What if this bad side wasn't a loose flaw, but the visible tip of a much older mechanism built to protect something that deep down this person is afraid of losing forever? Pay attention to what happens when someone born under the sign of Taurus is contradicted without warning. It's not a tantrum. It's not drama. It's something else, quieter and heavier. The body stiffens before the mouth even speaks. The shoulders rise an inch, almost imperceptibly, and there, in that exact second, something old is activated, a kind of alarm that has existed for much longer than this current argument. Because what seems like stubbornness is most of the time resistance. And resistance, for those born under this sign, is never about being right. It's about not letting the ground move again after it has already moved too much at some point that may not even be clearly remembered. There's a scene that repeats itself with slight variations in the life of practically every Taurus. Someone asks for a change. A small one, perhaps. Changing houses, routines, plans, ways of doing things. And the outward response seems like a simple refusal, but inside, something else is happening, a silent, almost instinctive calculation of how much this change will cost in terms of security. Because Taurus builds slowly, brick by brick, and each sudden change requested sounds in the body, like a threat to bring down everything that took years to build. Nobody explains this. Nobody teaches this. The person only feels the weight and reacts, without knowing how to name what they are reacting to. And here comes the part that most people avoid looking at head-on. There's a version of Taurus that holds grudges in silence, that doesn't speak, that only moves away an inch at a time, until one day the distance is enormous, and nobody knows exactly when it started. It wasn't a fight. It was a collection of small things, swallowed one by one, because speaking seemed to risk too much of what had already been built. And the problem with this silence is that it's not empty. It accumulates. And what accumulates at some point needs to go somewhere. There's also the other side of the same coin, the one almost no one associates with the same root, the attachment that begins as affection and without warning turns into possession. It's not about controlling the other person out of malice. It's about an internal logic that says, if I hold on tight enough, none of this will escape me. Holding on has become synonymous with loving at some point in that person's life, and no one corrected this equation in time. So they hold on to their partner, hold on to their plans, hold on even to old grudges, because letting go of anything seems, deep down, like a calculated risk of losing control over everything else. And there's a reaction that usually takes everyone by surprise, including Taurus themselves, the explosion that comes after far too long a period of patience. Weeks of silence, and sometimes months, swallowing the discomfort to maintain peace. And then, one day, for a reason that from the outside seems too small to justify it, the fury comes. It's not disproportionate, actually. It's proportional to everything that's been bottled up, not to the trigger that simply opened the pot. Those on the outside see it as an exaggeration, but nobody can answer it properly. An exaggeration compared to what? Compared to a ruler that nobody is using anymore, because only those who carry the weight know its true size. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book. It's called The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose. And what struck me most was how it talks about Taurus without treating the accumulated silence, the late-blooming anger, as a character flaw. It treats it as a map where the person learned too early that security only exists when built with their own hands. The book doesn't ask you to stop being who you are. It shows how to use that same strength in favor of a lighter life instead of a heavier one. If you've made it this far, something in this account probably struck you in an unsettling way. Perhaps you recognized your own accumulated silence, or the explosion that comes too late. This discomfort is no coincidence. It's the body recognizing a pattern before the mind names it. And it's precisely now, still within this discomfort, that it's worth looking at this. Not later, when routine returns and forgetfulness does its usual thing. The link is in the first pinned comment, but be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. And you? At what point in your life did you realize you were silently carrying too much weight, waiting for the right moment to finally let go? There's a question that's rarely asked of a Taurus, and perhaps should be. Do you cling to people or to the security they represent? Because there's a huge difference between the two, and it's not always easy to see which one is in control. Attachment, when it starts out healthy, is just care, attention, presence. But at some point, without any warning, it changes its function. It stops being about the loved one and becomes about the fear of feeling again that emptiness that was felt before, at some point that may not even be clearly remembered. And then, what was affection becomes control disguised as care. The person doesn't realize they're holding on too tightly because inside it doesn't feel like control. It feels like survival. And there's a subtle difference, almost invisible to outsiders, between liking someone and needing that person to remain exactly the same, forever, without any variation. Taurus tends to love what they already know, what they've already tested, what has already proven to be safe. And any sign that the loved one is changing, growing into a different place, can trigger a fear that isn't about the change itself, but about what that change might mean. Will this new version still want to stay? No one verbalizes this fear. It appears disguised as demands, jealousy, or acidic comments about a new hobby, a new friendship, a new routine. But behind each of these comments, almost always, lies the same unspoken question. Will you still be here when I wake up tomorrow? This explains a common scenario. A partner who just wants a weekend alone and feels, without quite understanding why, that it has become an issue. There was no shouting, no direct accusation, but there was an atmosphere, a silence that weighs differently. Because for someone who feels secure like oxygen, any distance seems like a rehearsal for abandonment, even when it's nothing of the sort. And the hardest part is that no one taught this person to separate the two things, protecting what matters and suffocating what matters for fear of losing it. And there's still an uncomfortable question behind all this, one that few dare to ask themselves: how much of what I call love is actually fear of being alone, disguised as care? It's not a question meant to generate guilt. It's a question meant to generate clarity, because only those who see the root can truly care for it, instead of just pruning the branches that appear on the outside year after year, without ever addressing what lies beneath the surface. Notice also how this manifests with objects, not just people. The house where you can't move the furniture, the routine that can't be altered even slightly, because each fixed detail is one less anchor to worry about. Some people call this resistance to change, as if it were that simple, but those who observe closely realize that it's not resistance to change itself. It's resistance to yet another uncontrollable variable in a life that already deals with too many variables, internally, silently, without ever discussing it with anyone. And there's one last layer, even more unsettling: the punishing silence. It's not an explicit tantrum. It's a half-degree retreat, almost imperceptible when something hurts and isn't said aloud. The person remains present in the environment, but absent inside. They respond, but briefly. They're there, but not fully present. And those who live with this feel the weight without understanding its origin, because there was no fight, no talking, just a distance that has settled in, made of accumulated silences, one on top of the other, until it forms a wall that no one built on purpose, but which is there, solid, between two people who still care about each other. What makes this silence so difficult to identify is that it doesn't seem like punishment for the person applying it. It seems like self-preservation. It seems like the only safe way to deal with pain that, if spoken aloud, could become more than you can control. But the person receiving this silence feels no self-preservation at all. They feel a door closed without explanation, and they start walking around it, trying to guess what they did wrong without ever getting a clear answer. It's a high cost, paid double, for a mechanism that was created to protect, but which unintentionally hurts both sides at the same time. The link is in the first pinned comment. But there's a positive aspect to this story that changes everything, and perhaps it's the most important positive aspect of all. What we call the bad side of Taurus, when looked at closely, truly without haste, is almost always the rawest and most honest version of a protective mechanism that worked too well for too long, without ever being updated. Stubbornness was born to protect against changes that, at some point in the past, arrived too quickly and hurt. Attachment was born to protect against losses that at some point in the past came without warning or farewell. Silence was born to protect against conflicts that at some point in the past seemed to threaten everything that had been built up to that point. It's not malice, it never was. It's an extremely competent defense system, created at a time when it was necessary, and it only remains active because no one has told it that it can rest now. Think of the root system of an old tree. When it was a sapling, those roots needed to cling deep because a strong wind could knock it all down before it grew enough. But the tree grows, the years pass, the trunk thickens, and the roots continue to cling with the same intensity as when they were indispensable, even though the tree is now large enough to sway a little without falling. No one blames the root for remaining firm. But there is a difference between a firm root and a root that has never loosened even a millimeter, even when loosening would be safe. And here lies the paradox that runs through this entire theme. The same force that makes Taurus seem difficult to live with is the force that makes Taurus, when finally understood, one of the most stable and reliable presences one can have around. The stubbornness that bothers is also the same constancy that holds the other person together on bad days. The attachment that suffocates is also the same loyalty that never goes away in the midst of the storm. And the silence that punishes is also the same silence that, when it finally learns to open up, carries an emotional depth that few signs can sustain. That's why almost everyone who has ever had a Taurus around truly, for long enough, carries the same phrase in their mind. I've never seen anyone so difficult to convince, and I've never seen anyone so impossible to lose sight of once they decide to stay. Both things stem from the same place. The difficulty in yielding and the certainty of permanence are the same force, just used in different directions, depending on what's at stake at that moment. What changes everything isn't ceasing to feel that weight. It's learning to listen to what it's trying to protect before it decides to act on its own. It's realizing the exact moment when stubbornness stopped being about principle and became about fear. It's noticing when attachment stopped being about love and became about control. It's feeling when silence stopped being about peace and became about punishment. This recognition alone already changes how the person relates to all of this. And here, it's worth making room for a second practical tool in this recognition process, The silence that punishes has a specific origin. The belief that exposing pain is exposing oneself too much, is becoming too vulnerable in front of someone who may not know what to do with it. And it is precisely about this belief that the digital book, The Divine Path, that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose, offers a different approach, showing that there is a way to maintain solidity, the same solidity that Taurus values so much, without needing to resort to silence as a weapon. True solidity doesn't need walls. It can open up and remain standing. You already possess the genius. You just need to unlock it. Access is in the first comment, but the last few units are disappearing. Click now and start this transformation. This doesn't happen overnight, and no one should promise it will, but there's a simple, almost obvious first step that most people never try. Naming aloud, even if only to yourself, what's behind the reaction before acting on it. Before getting bogged down in an argument, ask yourself, is this about what's being said now, or about an old change that still hurts? Before holding on too tightly to someone who only asked for a little space, ask yourself, is this care, or is it fear disguised as care? Before shutting down in silence, ask yourself, is this protection, or is it a way of making the other person pay for having hurt you unintentionally? Simple questions, but capable of interrupting a pattern that, without them, would automatically repeat itself in the same way for the umpteenth time. It's also worth looking at a specific variation of this same resistance, one that is often mistaken for simple laziness to change, the delay in admitting a mistake, even when, deep down, the person already knows they were wrong. It's not empty pride. It's that admitting a mistake, for someone who has built their identity on the idea of being reliable and stable, seems to shake the very foundation. As if one mistake could bring down the entire reputation of solidity that took a lifetime to build. And that's why the apology, when it finally comes, usually arrives late, somewhat awkwardly, wrapped in actions instead of words. A plate of food made without warning. A task completed in silence. Gestures that say what the mouth cannot yet admit aloud. This is perhaps the most real abundance that Taurus can build, not the kind kept in a vault, not the kind accumulated in silence, but the inner abundance of knowing oneself deeply enough to distinguish what protects from what imprisons. And it is precisely at this point that it becomes possible to transform all this brute force, all this accumulated resistance, into something practical and definitive. A map that already exists, ready to be followed. And that's what the digital book, The Divine Path, that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose, focuses on most carefully. Not transforming Taurus into something else, but revealing what this brute force has always been capable of building, once consciously directed. It's a book designed for those who are tired of carrying everything alone and want to finally understand their own weight enough to let go of what they no longer need to carry. You already possess the genius. You just need to unlock it. Access is in the first comment, but the last few units are disappearing. Click now and start this transformation. In the end, perhaps what remains is not the list of flaws so often repeated about Taurus, but a gentler question: how much love can fit within so much resistance? Because all this stubbornness, all this attachment, all this silence deep down have always been crude ways of saying the same thing, that there is something there that this person refuses to lose. And perhaps the bad side of Taurus, looked at closely with patience, isn't bad at all. It's just love that hasn't yet learned to express itself without armor. Love that confused protection with imprisonment because no one ever showed another way to do it. Love that learned, too early, that the world can take everything away suddenly, and that's why it's better to hold on with both hands, even when holding on hurts more than letting go would. But there's a quiet beauty in all of this that's rarely spoken of. This very capacity for resistance is what allows Taurus to weather storms that would bring down any other, more fragile structure. It's what makes a promise, made 10 years ago, still hold true today, without revision, without fine print. It's what makes someone stay by your side precisely on the days when staying by your side is most costly. This is the other side of the same coin. The same root that sometimes suffocates is the root that holds the entire tree upright, even after everything around it has fallen. And that, in the end, is not weakness. It is the silentest proof that beneath all that firm ground, there has always been a root willing to hold everything together until the end, and that, when it learns to open up without ceasing to be firm, it becomes exactly what everyone, without realizing it, has always sought: a safe place to land.